Towelket One More Time is an underappreciated and criminally underrated series of games. Despite being one of the longest running RPG Maker series that's recognized for its incredible writing and characters by a cult following of fans, it hardly gets the recognition it deserves. After developing the first game, Towelket 3, Kaneshimi Hochikisu, otherwise known as Kanao, didn't see too much recognition. Towelket 3 was a fairly charming and interesting game. It had some twisted moments and interesting ideas, but the overall plot was straightforward and lighthearted. It was essentially a pretty normal RPG adventure at its core, which didn't attract too much attention. That all changed with Towelket 2. Compared to Towelket 3, Kanao decided to focus much more on a serious and deep storyline. Although it's just as weird and bizarre with its ideas, Towelket 2's approach to tone and atmosphere are much heavier and darker. Because of this, the game picked up far more attention than its predecessor, easily becoming one of the most popular and well-known Towelket games. Simply put, Towelket 2 is widely considered to be a much better game than Towelket 3. It's not actually uncommon for some fans to argue that you should just skip Towelket 3 due to the disparity between the two. While I personally liked Towelket 3 and would encourage people to play it, I can't argue that Towelket 2 is simply a much better representative of what the series would become over time, and it's one of the most important games in the series. It's a bit confusing to explain, but one of the things that helps this attitude is how the plotlines between the two games are connected. Towelket 2 is technically a direct sequel to Towelket 3, but only in a superficial manner. There are characters and references to Towelket 3, but none of it is tied to the story. I'll go into more detail in the video, but for now, just know that even if you don't know anything about Towelket 3, you can still enjoy this game and video. I'll bring up any context you need to know when I make comparisons to Towelket 3. Despite all the praise, Towelket 2 is a game that has a lot of controversy surrounding it. The story, the reception, and even Kanao's own opinion of the game are all controversial topics that we'll explore in this video. As the game has a darker storyline, it also involves some more controversial topics. The game actually handles these in a mature way that ties in well with the story and themes, but it might not appear that way at first. Consider this your content warning, as I've seen a good number of people drop the game before they can get a better understanding of what's happening. It's a shame too, as Towelket 2's approach is something that I doubt many developers would be brave enough to attempt, and is just another reason why the Towelket series stands out. Tied in with this, out of all of the Towelket games, Towelket 2 probably has some of the most misinformation about it, which is something I want to try and address. There's a large amount to talk about here and there, both about the game itself and the meta aspects regarding the game. I certainly want to try and inform people about what this game is and what it means as best as I can, but this discussion requires knowledge of the game before we can talk about it. With that, I'm going to try my best to tell you about Towelket One More Time too. So let's take a look at the game that was so significant for the series. When the game first starts off, you can immediately tell that it has a very silly tone, as every button input elicits a ridiculous sound effect. Yeah, I know I just spent the entire intro talking about how serious and dark this game is. Just trust me, okay? This persists through basically every single menu in the game, and immediately sets the tone for it. We're met with a talking cow who asks us to enter our name. In the original release of the game, this character wasn't actually given a proper default name. However, blog posts from Kanao stated that this character's name is Mochi, so we'll go with that for our playthrough. We find ourselves woken up in a bedroom full of cows, with piles of cow poop all over the floor. The cow who woke us up walks downstairs, and we get ready for the day by getting dressed. Our mother is downstairs and nags us about how Cow-chan, the seemingly bipedal cow, always has to wake us up. It seems that our family runs a cow farm and our protagonist quite loves cows, but Cow-chan is our favorite. Mom tells us that our good friend Paripariume is coming over to walk us to school soon, revealing the heroine for the story, a red-haired girl with a big ponytail. This is our first example of a supposed reoccurring character in a Towelket game. In Towelket 3, Paripariume was a minor ant character who sang at a bar. However, she is very clearly a completely different character in this game, being our protagonist's human childhood friend and a major character in this story. Due to the length of her name, she's sometimes simply referred to as PPU. She's come home to walk to school together with us, which seems like an everyday occurrence with how friendly she is with us and our mom. Before we get too far, Cow-chan follows behind, who wants to come to school with us. She joins our party, giving us our 3-person starting party as we start the game proper. Now, something very different and unique about the game gameplay-wise is the introduction of what the game calls the special menu. A radial menu which lets you access some special game features and is introduced the moment you leave your home. There's a lot to unpack here, and I apologize for going on such a tangent before getting started with the story, but it's a genuinely very creative and beloved part of Towelket 2. The first feature is something called the Flower Garden. This is a simple map which takes place in a small open field with empty rows. Over the course of the game, you can collect flower items which can be planted here. Flowers can be found hidden all over the game world, after special events, or even just as random item drops. There are 3 tiers, bronze, silver, and gold, and you can plant your flowers in any spot designated for the correct tier. Each flower represents a stat, and when planted will improve the stats of all of your characters, so it's certainly worth coming back here every so often to plant any flowers you've collected. To put it simply, it's really just a stat point allocation menu, but the theming of this area is wonderful. Not only is a flower field a very scenic way of showing personal growth, but it feels meaningful to watch as your flower field grows over the course of the game. Due to both the specific nature and randomness of collecting flowers, each person's playthrough will likely have a unique flower field. Maybe you'll organize your flowers in some way so the colors are all nice and organized. Maybe you'll take a gameplay first approach and focus hard on a specific stat, or refuse to plant specific flowers since they take up precious space. Furthermore, the highest tier flowers are often very rare or are gained through missable optional events, so when you see that specific gold tier flower planted, that's not just a random stat boost, but proof of an event. The flowers you plant are also permanent and can't be removed, so all of this results in your flower field being something unique and special. I do just want to point out though that while there's limited space, you'll probably beat the game long before you finish the whole flower field, so don't worry too much about what you plant or how, just do whatever feels right. The next special menu feature is the Hint button, which teleports you to a special one-room map. This map is a sleazy bar immediately made apparent by the music, the trashy aesthetics of the room, and the bartender who gives you a look that says, "I really wish I weren't here right now." This is Elizabeth, who seems to be a character who exists within your mind. Maybe. Probably. Maybe. She's clearly an exhausted older woman who introduces the bar as a place for people who have trouble with video games. At pretty much any point of the game, you can come here to her bar and she'll give you a hint on where to go, making her helpful if you get lost at any point in the game. I love Elizabeth, and despite being detached from the plot of the game, the character put into her writing is great. She's clearly old and tired, but has a sort of seductive, naughty side to her. She clearly gets some entertainment from talking to a young boy like Mochi. For a character that you never have to see for your entire playthrough, she has a surprisingly large amount of dialogue. For pretty much any moment of the game, she has unique text and hints that she can give you. There are some cases where it's literally impossible for someone to get lost or confused, like the equivalent of the player being in an empty closet, and she'll still have dialogue, all for a hint that equates to, "Walk out the door, dummy." Furthermore, some of her text reveals that she has some personal backstory herself. It's easy to miss if you aren't checking on her constantly. But basically, she's not just a throwaway hint NPC, but a real character all on her own. Even if you don't actually need her help, it's worth checking in on her from time to time just because she's an amusing character. The last special menu is the biggest and most important one, the Mind. This place represents an inner space within the protagonist's mind, a safe, comfortable space where you can hide away. The Mind first resembles an empty home with little color, with only a couple of friendly characters, including another helpful Paripariume. Over time, you can purchase things for your inner home, including furniture, pets, and even girls. A lot of these are just cosmetic, but some of them will provide you with helpful items or skills. On the right side of the home is a kitchen, which you can use to cook food. The ingredients for food are collected from battles and can be turned into powerful healing items or even permanent stat increasing items. The rooms to the left side of the home represent chapters of the game, and just like in Towelket 3, they will slowly fill up with memories of what happened over the course of your journey. Each one of these gives stat boosts, helpful items, or unlock new skills which will be helpful to you. So once again, you'll want to return here every so often to recall what's happened and for the helpful buffs. What makes the mine such a great creative concept is that it's so many things at once. It's a helpful place gameplay-wise where you can get new skills, stat buffs, and items. It acts as a collection of memories, a synopsis which helps you remember what's happened over the course of the stories you've seen in the game. But it actually has important story relevance too. It's not just a side area, but a vital part of this game's story, both in a literal and a thematic sense, which I have to talk about more when it becomes relevant. Somehow, despite involving so many different ideas at once, it's all wrapped up in this neat package that blends in directly with the themes and story of the game. Definitely expect me to return to this area later in the video, so keep it in your memory for now. Now, here's the thing about everything I've mentioned. You might have noticed a trend about these special features. The flower garden helps you by giving you stats. The hint menu helps you by telling you where to go, and the mind is full of helpful items and bonuses. All of these things make the game easier. But here's the thing, this game is already easy. Even if you ignore all of these features entirely, you won't find this game difficult. Towelket 2 is very easy by RPG standards, and using some of these special menus will make it a cakewalk. I can cut Elizabeth some slack because there are a couple of spots in the game where you could actually get lost. And if you stop playing for a while and forget where to go, she can be helpful just to remind you what you were doing. But the bonuses to combat are entirely unnecessary. Even things like the food items are mostly pointless because by the end of the game, there are so many free healing spots, like these white save point signs, that you shouldn't have a problem with health. For an example, there's one map where there's two of these free full heal signs on the same screen, just steps away from each other for some reason. The game almost feels like it's coddling you at times. My best guess is that Canal might have received complaints about Towelket 3 Classic being too difficult, so this was all done as a sort of overcorrection to fix that. Now, to be fair, Towelket 2 is a more narrative-driven game than Towelket 3, so in some ways, the lower difficulty might be a good thing. After all, if there was too much focus on difficult RPG combat, that could take away from the story, or wall players who aren't good at games but just want to read the story. It's not uncommon to see RPG Maker games with a story focus to just remove combat entirely from the game, or make it so easy that it doesn't require any thought. However, I also want to clear up another large misconception some people have. Towelket 2, despite being an easy game with a story focus, is not what I would consider a walking simulator. Despite the game being very easy, it just barely requires enough attention so that you don't die, and this game is chock full of enemies. Thankfully, there are no random encounters, but some maps have so many enemies and narrow corridors that you'll inevitably get into more combat than you want. Furthermore, there aren't any difficulty spikes in this game, so you don't have a reason to fight for levels or money. This results in combat becoming tedious and annoying, especially in later sections of the game. Honestly, it's more engaging gameplay to try dodging all the on-screen enemies than to actually fight them, lest you be punished with an encounter which wastes more of your time. This is probably the biggest weakness of Towelket 2. While the game contains an amazing story and great theming, the actual amount of combat distracts you from that. The combat is too easy, taking away the purpose of all of the flavor put into so many aspects of the game, but it's also so frequent that it takes away from the story. There are some later parts of the game that just feel like filler because you want to hear more of the story, but the game will throw you into a dungeon full of fights that you couldn't care less about. I'm honestly torn on whether I'd prefer this game to be a full-on walking simulator, so the story could be presented with fewer interruptions, or if I'd rather just have the combat be harder so it's more engaging and things like the stat boost from the flower garden would feel impactful. The design and flavor of these special menu features is absolutely perfect, but the design of the game itself holds it back. Just out of curiosity, I actually played through the game once without interacting with any of these systems, and I was still able to beat the game without any difficulty. Later game enemies did actually start to deal noticeable damage, but it still wasn't anything I'd call hard. However, if you do play Towelket 2, I'd highly suggest you don't do what I did and just have fun with these systems. Especially with the mind, as it unlocks new combat abilities. Even if it technically makes the already easy combat easier, it's at least more interesting when you have more abilities and skills. Okay, sorry about that long-winded rant, but I wanted to get it out of the way since this is all part of the same system. Now let's continue on with the game. On our way to school, we have to fight our way through concerningly large amounts of angry chickens and rats. Combat is very similar to Towelket 3, with buffs, status effects, and attack types. However, as I said, it's much easier as most enemies simply have stats that are too low to be threatening. All you need to know is that once you unlock skills that buff your character's attack and defense, using these will make any fight a joke. I will say though that I do love the attack animations and sound effects for fighting, which are somewhat amusing. Pretty much everything we interact with tells us that we should hurry to class before we're late, so we quickly make our way to school. At school, we can talk to our classmates who help us find our way to the classroom where class is starting. So far, it seems like a pretty boring school day as we sit down for class. However, just as class begins, we see Cow-chan standing outside of the school, waiting for us as a comedic scene plays out. Inside of the classroom, Mochi notices Cow-chan being carried away by the UFO, but the teacher prevents him from leaving. After class ends, Paripariume tries to talk to him, but Mochi has none of it and pushes her out of the way to go chasing after his beloved cow, leaving us in control of her as we go home. Paripariume is clearly not in a good mood as she storms back home. Although you can just head there directly, you can take a detour and explore the town fully now, revealing a gameplay element that I can only call Kleptomania. In Towelket 3, there were a decent amount of collectible items in the game that you could pick up from the environment, ranging from dust, to food, to drinkable bathwater, but the pickup points in that game were fairly limited. In Towelket 2, however, there's countless things to pick up. You can pick up apples off of the trees, leaves off of the plants, break into people's homes and loot their drawers for their underwear. You know what, let's take the drawer too. And that chair, they won't be needing it anymore. The TV, it's mine now. Pretty much everything can be interacted with to give you an item of some kind, to the point where when you find something that you can't steal, it feels disappointing. Now, to be fair, a lot of it is just junk that isn't too useful, but it definitely makes exploring the town more fun. Later in the game, you'll see a lot less of this behavior, so you might as well steal everything now. After you've satisfied your desire to steal everything that's not bolted down, Paripariume finally returns home, where her mother greets her. Judging by her white hair and slow walking pace, she's a bit of an older woman. She notices that Paripariume is upset, clearly clued in by her angry expression box. She guesses immediately that it's because of something with Mochi, causing Paripariume to storm off again, and she just laughs at her daughter. Later, however, it seems that the situation is a little more serious than she first thought. It's nighttime now, and Mochi still hasn't returned home. Paripariume's mother states that she'll be helping Mochi's mother look for her son, and leaves Paripariume in the house alone. PPU, being concerned for Mochi now that she's cooled off, goes over to his house to see if Cow-chan is back home. There's a more somber, spooky tone as Paripariume goes through the town at night, heading over to Mochi's home. One thing I'd quickly suggest doing is taking a detour into the school, where you'll find vengeful cow ghosts to fight. If you fight one of them, you'll unlock a mind reward for ghostly cow shurikens. It's not very strong now, but it might be the best weapon in the game later, so I suggest grabbing it. Once Paripariume reaches Mochi's home, you'll find that it's empty, except for a mouse living in Mochi's bedroom. It gives us a hint that Mochi is likely hiding in the forest behind the school. Wait, can PPU understand mouse? Ignoring that, PPU heads outside and it starts to rain. You can walk past both moms as they look for Mochi despite the rain starting up, clearly concerned for the boy. Past the school is the forest trail, filled with all manners of bug enemies. Near the end, there's a boss in the form of a wild pig. It looks intimidating, especially with the scary music, and supposedly being level 5 when you might only be level 1 or 2. But it's no match for PPU's ability to kick it in the face. It's technically optional, as you can walk past it, but it gives you another mind reward, so you might as well fight it. Just steal an apple or two off of a tree for healing, and you shouldn't have any problems. Past the pig, PPU finally finds Mochi cowering underneath a tree, downtrodden over Cow-chan's disappearance. PPU brings him back home, but it seems like Cow-chan really is gone. The next day, a much more cheerful PPU wakes up, ready to bring Mochi to school once again as always. However, as she arrives at his home, his mother excuses him, saying that he's sick from staying outside in the rain and can't make it to school. In reality, though, he's being depressed in his room, still worried about Cow-chan's disappearance. His mother is disappointed, but still lets him skip school for the day. He stays in his room, sulking about Cow-chan as the day passes by. Later that day, as Mochi is still moping about at home, Paripariume invites herself in anyways with a plan. During school, she created a series of missing cow flyers, which she asked Mochi to help spread around the townsfolk very enthusiastically. We then need to go around the town and hand out at least 5 flyers. There's a lot of NPCs, so this doesn't take very much time at all. It seems that everyone in town is friendly enough to take a flyer, sometimes even offering to help spread the flyers out themselves and taking multiple. It really helps sell the idea that this quaint little town is full of friendly people who care about Mochi, our family, and even Cow-chan. This is something I have to mention that's very difficult to convey without playing the game yourself. The atmosphere and tone of this game is very strong, and is implemented extremely well throughout the game. Through a mix of music, flavor text, and sprite work, we've experienced the atmosphere of being in a quiet, countryside town, the concern over a missing boy, and now the feeling that we're in a cozy and friendly neighborhood who cares about us. Now, a town being cozy isn't a revolutionary thing in an RPG. I'm sure you could think of a lot of RPGs with cozy towns, but Towelket 2 doesn't just have cozy areas for the sake of being cozy. The atmosphere the game presents right here from the very beginning of the game is an important part of Towelket 2's structure. A lot of these things that you'll see now, like seemingly pointless dialogue from random NPCs, isn't just for show. It will mean more to you as you play through the game. Another key part of Towelket 2's atmosphere is the music. Now, all of the in-game music is from royalty-free music banks, so it's not original to the game or anything, but you'll quickly find that it's used extremely well in this game. Even if you can't compliment Kanao for making it, you can certainly compliment Kanao for using it well. I don't think there's a single music track in this game that doesn't feel fitting, and I think a lot of people would probably believe you if you just claimed that this music was specifically made for this game. It seems that spreading out the flyers helped Mochi out, if just a little, as his mother thanks Paripariume for the help. She asks if Paripariume could have a sleepover with Mochi, just as another way to cheer him up. She agrees, and soon enough we're having a sleepover with her. Thankfully it ends up that Mochi at least had the self-decency to clean up all the poop off the floor, but even then it seems our mom's biggest concern isn't having PPU sleep with a bunch of stinky cows. Everyone is all concerned about Mochi sleeping in the same room as PPU, so she'll be sleeping downstairs with our mom instead. We're only like 12 years old, and we still can't be trusted to have a normal sleepover with our friend just because we're a guy. Once night falls, however, Mochi hears a loud, familiar moo from outside. Thinking that Cow-chan must have returned, Mochi quickly rushes outside, although feel free to poke Paripariume before you go. Then you can step outside once you're ready to see Mochi and Cow-chan reunite. We're then brought to Chapter 2, about Mitsue the announcer. She's introduced as a very pretty and popular TV announcer, and we'll be taking control over her in this chapter. The first order of business is to get to the news station where she works, but there's lots to see in the city. Despite Mitsue acting like a popular celebrity, don't let that stop you from breaking into people's homes and picking up everything that isn't glued down. You can steal people's furniture, their garbage, and even their toilet water. You can also go back into Mitsue's apartment and pick up an infinite amount of her used bath water. That seems kind of familiar. No, let's not do that again. Going outside in the city is surprisingly dangerous, as we're assaulted almost immediately by a bunch of paparazzi who chase us and get in the way. At the very least, it lets us hear Mitsue's unique way of fighting. Inside of the news station, there's a lot of items to loot, including some free equipment in some of the lockers. You can even pick up an entire vending machine, which makes her a pretty strong weapon. I can't even imagine how Mitsue is carrying this thing around and bashing people over the head with it. Getting to the director, he tells us that our job today is to report on the disappearance of a boy in the countryside. Mitsue clearly thinks she's above this task, but acts professional since she's in front of her boss and accepts. We meet up with our co-worker camera lady and take the train out into the boondocks, as Mitsue puts it. We can talk to some of the NPCs around town, but they don't offer too much in terms of help, either being too suspicious of Mitsue, or just mentioning how sad the situation is. We can learn from an NPC that Mochi's father died, leaving him with a widowed mother, and that the shock of losing Mochi resulted in her locking herself up indoors. That's pretty depressing, but when we go in to check in on the house and don't receive an answer, Mitsue calls her a pain in the ass. Wow, what a bitch. Without that lead, we instead go to Paripariume's house, where she's talking with the police about what happened. She tells Mitsue that Mochi likely went missing trying to look for Cow-chan, which is honestly a pretty reasonable assumption, since he basically did that already. However, Mitsue doesn't seem very convinced, as right after leaving the house, she complains about this news story being completely unbelievable and worthless. She states that he was obviously kidnapped and brought to the city instead, especially with how naive a country bumpkin would be. Meanwhile, inside of the home, Paripariume is shown to be eavesdropping on the conversation, wondering if Mochi really did get kidnapped and brought to the city. Outside, Mitsue is already planning on going back to the city by train, while her co-worker tries to convince her that PPU's story might be true. But Mitsue states that she doesn't care. She says that maybe they'll have cute calf children together. God damn, Mitsue. At the same time, Paripariume has become convinced that Mochi must be in the city, and has already packed a bag to travel there to look for him. There's this heroic music playing in the background, as she prepares to find her missing childhood friend, which is tragic because we already know she's almost certainly not going to find him there. She leaves a note for her mother explaining where she's going by the door, and takes the train to the city far, far away from home, confident that she will find Mochi and bring him back. As the screen fades back in, we're brought to the perspective of Mochi, who wakes up in some fleshy room with pulsating and bobbing objects. Walking outside, it's made apparent that we really are in an alien spaceship, occupied by weird duck-like aliens. Talking to one, it refers to us as B5 before attacking us in combat. It goes down easily, but upon winning, it simply states interesting and then continues as if nothing happened. It's clear that even though we can fight these things, they aren't threatened by our presence at all. Going inside of a room, we find the grisly sight of what's clearly a copy of us, melting away in a pod similar to the one we woke up in. The alien in front of it refers to it as B2, which makes it pretty clear what's happening. The aliens have abducted Mochi and have started cloning him. And we're not even Mochi anymore, we're just one of those clones. The cloning process isn't kind with how the B2 clone died, but the aliens don't seem too concerned. Progressing forward, we find some unidentifiable lumps on the ground, as well as rooms showing that they were doing the exact same thing to Cow-chan, as we see malformed cow lumps and disassembled cow robots. One of the aliens states that the cow clones, or Type A's, aren't too useful as they short-circuit after activation. These clones seem to be some sort of mix between flesh and robotic, making them more like androids or cyborgs. Eventually, we reach some sort of large meeting room with a large number of the aliens, who seem to be impressed by our ability to make it here, before one of them casually blows off our head with a ray gun and kills us. Judging from what's left of us, it seems like this is where those other piles of meat we passed by came from, and they're not planning on stopping anytime soon. We then get brought back to PPU's view, who has made her way into the city. It's a much more foreboding place at night, and you can be attacked by hookers on the street who seem to have taken a liking to Paripariume. However, these same hookers can help you get an item called Connections, which lets you participate in an optional quiz show at the news station, which rewards you with a gold agility flower. You can explore around the city and talk to NPCs, but they don't seem to offer much help. In fact, the only real advice you seem to get is to avoid the backstreets, as there's a shady establishment there. In fact, even Elizabeth, whose job is to help you progress through the game, tells you it's a bad idea to go there. But if we want to continue, we'll have to, so down there we go. Now, this is where the tone and direction of this game changes dramatically, and pretty much everything from this point on would be spoilers to some degree. The story isn't finished setting up its main plot points, but the tonal shift that occurs here is something that I would highly recommend experiencing for yourself. I can try my best to explain it, but there's really no substitute for experiencing the confusion, terror, and panic that the game is about to introduce from here on. If you don't want spoilers, you can skip to this time in the video to hear my spoiler-free final thoughts about the game, and in the description, you should download the game and play it for the once-in-a-lifetime experience that is Towelket 2. I promise that even if you think you know where this game is going, you really don't and aren't ready for it. I know that sounds like an exaggeration, but it really isn't. If you're good with these warnings, then let's continue. Inside of the backstreets, Paripariume wonders where Mochi is, realizing that she hasn't found any leads on where he might be. Thinking that now she should finally go back home, she starts to head back, but she bumps into a man who drops his watch on the ground. He gets upset at her, asking her to compensate for breaking his watch. We're brought back to Mochi's view, or really another clone of his, as we find the horrors continue as we wake up and see another clone of ours melting away. We barely have time to walk around before we enter a room and are shot dead yet again. In this room, the aliens have another of our clones, and a Cow-chan clone, and state that they're preparing an interspecies cross-breeding test. Years pass by in a time skip, and we see that Paripariume, now simply referred to as Blonde Woman, is singing at the pub, the same one she was forced into earlier to entertain the guests there. Inside of a nearby train, Mitsue stares out the window, thinking of how she was fired from her job because of her age and replaced with a younger announcer. She can't even look at younger girls without feeling like her head is breaking apart, depressed at her worthlessness now that she's older. Finally, we're brought back to Mochi's view once more, woken up by Cow-chan and revealing that we're now the father of 3 half-cow, half-human children. Now, I know that was a lot to take in so suddenly, but that's how it's presented in-game. You're barely even given a moment to process what's happening before you're given disturbing scene after scene before unceremoniously giving you a huge time skip and dumping you back in the game. There's a lot to talk about regarding this sequence, and I understand that a lot of viewers watching will want a moment to think about what just happened, but I will discuss my own personal thoughts on everything once we talk about the game as a whole later. Speaking with Cow-chan, we can ask her a few questions, revealing that it's been around 3 to 5 years since this all began. We also learned that cows like her are considered A models, and she's the 11th model, while we're considered a B type and we're the 12th. Asking her to escape, she agrees to do so, claiming that she's tampered with our settings to allow us to do so. She promises that once we escape, we'll be able to bring an end to the alien menace later. It seems that this might all just be a test from the aliens, but we can't do anything but try to make a break for it. The ship is now a confusing mess of nonsensical rooms and hallways, really adding to the confusion and feeling of being in a foreign, alien place. The once uncaring aliens seem to be out for blood now, and there's tons of them chasing you down for fights rather than simply ignoring you. Eventually, we find our way to a door with a huge pile of corpses outside, but Cow-chan prevents us from entering, simply stating that it's dangerous. We instead go past the corpses and jump out of the ship. Cow-chan gives us a parachute, but it ends up being a backpack with lunch in it instead. And we violently crash back on Earth, deep in some forest. We seem to be badly hurt, but Cow-chan survives and tries to resuscitate us. She reboots us, which seems to fix our body, but our memories become lost, and we forget who she is. From now on, the Mochi we're controlling has lost all memories of his past. We then realize that next to us seems to be a familiar gray-haired woman, surrounded by piles of pills. It's Mitsue, who ran into the forest to commit suicide by overdosing on drugs, leaving a suicide note cursing her director. As we inspect her, she seems to be alive. We're brought back to Paripariume, who has been working at this place for years. It's clear that despite the exterior of a pub, it's really a brothel, where the girls are treated like prisoners. Rats infest the hallways, and girls like PPU are locked into cells with metal doors. For the past few years, Paripariume has been forced to service men each day. The only thing keeping her going is the thought of once again seeing Mochi, as she looks at her one keepsake, a photograph of him. As she's contemplating, an earthquake suddenly hits the area, breaking the iron door off of its hinges. PPU picks it up, just to remind you that even in times like these we can equip huge metal objects, and flees out the front door. Outside, the city is being bombarded by clones of Mochi and Cow-chan, although they're unrecognizable black lumps by the time they hit the ground. Agaha, the woman who was initially responsible for bridging Paripariume into the brothel, urges her to escape, using the commotion as a distraction. As Paripariume escapes, we find that the aliens have finally made their presence known as they land on Earth. They quickly begin exterminating the humans, hinting that the data they acquired from Mochi will help them do so. Returning back to Mochi, Mitsue talks about Cow-chan's plan to go to the TV station to warn Earth about the alien invasion and to help the planet fight off against the alien invaders. She's oddly cheerful considering that she just tried committing suicide moments ago, and receptive considering that she's talking to a cow, but it seems like the drugs are making her extra agreeable at the moment, which, yeah, I guess someone on drugs would probably hallucinate a talking cow and follow them. We then work our way out of the forest to try and return to civilization, which is an annoyingly long area full of tons of enemies and narrow corridors. There's hostile cow clones which try to attack us, as well as some snakes that wander around randomly. It's really easy to bump into enemies here by accident, so expect to get into a few fights whether you want to or not. Leaving the forest, we find ourselves back in our hometown. It seems that the disappearance of Mochi and Paripariume hasn't been kind to this town, as it's in a state of disrepair. We find out that the letter Paripariume wrote for her mother was never read, as the wind blew it away into a nearby tree, and she doesn't answer the door. Patches of dead dirt litter the ground, and missing posters of the two children can still be found. Some of the remaining townsfolk seem to recognize us, but comment that we couldn't possibly be Mochi, as he would be much older if we were him. Worst of all, however, is our old family home, which has been abandoned. The farm has closed down, the bridge has become worn out, and the cow pasture has become overgrown, with only a few remaining cows left waiting. It's possible that our mother is no longer alive, as one villager implies that she took her own life after losing her family. Since our goal is to reach the city, we find our way back to the train station, and Cow-chan hijacks the train so we can use it to travel. We get a brief cutscene of the aliens, who seem to recognize that we're no longer in the boundaries of an experiment, but instead an out-of-control factor that needs to be stopped. This pretty much confirms that we were likely activated as part of an experiment, but due to Cow-chan's tampering, we've managed to escape it. They deploy something that they call a new type to stop us and send it to our position. While we're on the train, Cow-chan talks about our lost memories, saying that she'll always love us even if we don't remember her. We don't get too much time to ourselves though before the train gets forcibly stopped. No doubt that new type the game just introduced. Now, I think the game is trying to sort of hype this up as a boss fight. If you go into the hint room, Elizabeth even talks about you needing to prepare for the fight. But this thing is so laughably easy that you shouldn't have any problem. It tries to pretend to be menacing, using group attacks and status effects, but its damage is so low that it's not threatening. If you have Mochi's attack buff ability, just use that a couple times and the fight will go a lot faster. After winning the fight, the aliens seemed genuinely surprised that we were able to win, before claiming that it was entirely caused because of the unexpected factor that is Mitsue being in our party. Basically, according to the story, Mitsue unexpectedly joining us is the only reason we're alive, but let's be real, that boss fight was so easy, we really didn't need her help. This does seem to show, though, that the aliens aren't quite as omnipresent as they originally seemed, and that we might have an actual chance of winning. But unfortunately, they still broke the train tracks and are on our tail, so the party is forced to retreat back to town for now. Sometime later, we're brought to the scene of two girls running away from one of the aliens, before one of them gets shot dead. The other gets rescued by Cow-chan, who fights off the alien before telling the girl to follow her. We're given a moment to explore the wreckage of the school, and it's clear that this place has seen better days. Not only is the place falling apart, but there are unrecognizable corpses that the aliens have left behind everywhere. It seems for some amount of time, our party has been living inside of the secret base inside of a locker. I don't even know how this got built, or how this huge room fits in this locker, but I'm just going to assume Cow-chan put it together somehow. We talk to the girl that Cow-chan saved, but she doesn't get to speak much before her speech is suddenly cut off as her head explodes with alien parasites and we're forced to kill her. Strangely, the party doesn't really acknowledge how they were just attacked by a horrible parasitized abomination, since that's a pretty big development on this whole alien invasion thing, but I guess they couldn't say anything that we've already figured out. The game then just unceremoniously drops you off here, letting you explore as you'd like. First off though, we should check the giant radio in the room, where we hear that there's a research lab on the mountains looking for survivors. It's our only lead at the moment, so that's our new goal for now. So all of that happened pretty quickly. There was another time skip of some unknown amount, 2 people died right in front of us, horrible alien parasites burst from one of their heads, everything has clearly gone to shit even more, and only now do we really have a chance to take it in and absorb it. Going outside, we see that the once cheerful hometown of ours has completely rotted away, ravaged by the alien attack. All of the trees have died, poisonous puddles of purple wastewater cover the ground, and all of the houses have broken down. Aliens roam the town, looking for survivors, and you can find evidence of former neighbors being killed in their own homes. Going back to our home, all of our poor cows have been killed. Worst of all, it seems in our room there's a pile of meat left behind next to our bed, indistinguishable from all the others around town. Was it our mother? Did she kill herself earlier like the townspeople implied, or did this alien in this room kill her? Or was it someone else who just tried hiding here for shelter? It's never answered, and our protagonist wouldn't remember her anyways. The only recognizable corpse in the town is the one found in Paripariume's home, who Cow-chan recognizes. The atmosphere of being able to explore the town is really depressing, and while we saw how the town degraded over the course of the first time skip, it's now destroyed beyond repair from the alien attack. Being able to compare this town to the one from the start of the game, or even after the first time skip, really hits hard. You really feel the burden of time weighing down on you, as your once friendly hometown crumbles away whenever you're not watching. The concept of your hometown being destroyed by the villain isn't new in RPG games, but the way Towelket 2 presents it is far harder hitting than any other RPG I've seen, especially with the way it lets you get familiar with the original town, and the depressing smaller details you can find if you look for them. Sometimes in those games, there's a chance that the people living there could have escaped with their lives, but here you can already tell that there's no chance of that happening. This place that you once called home is nothing more than a wasteland full of corpses and hostile aliens that want you dead. Aside from wallowing in our misery, there's nothing much to do here now other than leave for the mountain, at least letting us get away from that depressing place. We get a handy sign from Elizabeth about following the mountain trail to avoid getting lost, and it's really not kidding. You can genuinely get lost in this area. It's not linear, and it loops around back to town, so you can end up wasting a lot of time if you don't follow this advice. There's nothing particularly interesting around the optional maps either, so just follow the path and save yourself the headache. Eventually, we stumble into something that really doesn't seem to belong in this nature trail, a cubicle robot. It talks about protecting its master before attacking us, so we have to beat it up. It looks the same as the robots in Towelket 3, but don't worry, they're unrelated. Right afterwards, we see a strange little scene where another robot notices us before running away. It's oddly cute about doing so, and it drops a key, so of course we pick it up. We find it on the next screen, trying to get inside of its home. The party tries to hold a friendly conversation with it, and it explodes from social anxiety. Entering inside, we find ourselves in a laboratory, filled with more of these robots. Talking to them, it's pretty clear that the transmission came from here, and whoever made this facility was looking for survivors. Some of the robots didn't get the memo though, and this place is sort of like a dungeon where half of the robots are nice enough to talk to us, but the other half are enemies. In one of the rooms, we find the robot that sent out the original transmission, and they guide us to go see their master, giving us a key card. Or 99 keycards, just in case something wrong happens. I can only assume that this is some strange joke based around the player being able to lose the keycard in an earlier version of the game or something. The robot also casually mentions that it's been about 5 months since it started looking for survivors. So, does that mean that we were living in that locker with Mitsue for 5 months? I guess she was just okay with living with a boy and his cow family for that long. Do you think she had to realize that the talking cow wasn't just a hallucination at some point? Let's not question it too hard. Downstairs, we find the room with the professor in it and use our keycard, or all 99 of them, and find the professor. She's a pink-haired girl who refers to herself as Professor Ketusago, although fans usually know her by her first name, Agochu. She runs some experiments on Cow-chan and Mochi, and the topic of his memories comes up. She says that she definitely can't restore his memories, not with her equipment, but she offers to let us stay for now since, well, this place is probably better than that dinky locker we were stuck in. Plus, maybe it's a good thing that he can't remember anything, considering what he's gone through. In the meantime, she's doing research on the aliens to see if it's possible to defeat them, but she's not very optimistic. We can explore around for a little bit, and we can find a few interesting little tidbits of lore in the laboratory, now that the robots aren't all trying to murder us. First off, we learn that Ketusago is a bit of a child genius who made these robots when she was just 12 years old. But that's also why they're so socially anxious. They're based around her personality when she was younger. There's also this incredibly bizarre optional room that you can find, filled with Kasetsu aliens and tanks. Now, I'm sure you've noticed them on screen in some other rooms, but you might have just assumed it was a visual cameo of some kind. Here, there's some lore which sort of ties the two games together. For those of you who don't know, the Kasetsu aliens were the villains of the previous game, Towelket 3, and now they're just here in tanks. I have to assume that Ketusago found these remnants of the Kasetsu aliens after they were defeated and started studying them. And I guess she grew them to human size too, because in that game they were supposed to be tiny. She writes about how intelligent they are and talks about breeding them and implanting them into humans. And then this robot says that she launched some of them back into space. I can only assume that this is intended to be some sort of teaser for how the fish hats could return someday, but what a strange way to drop this information. I know that this might just seem like a cameo more than anything, and it sort of is, but if you have knowledge of the later games, you're going to find this pretty insane, so I have to point this out now. This whole thing also hints at Towelket 2 being a direct sequel to Towelket 3, but it's complicated and we'll have to talk about it later. Returning to the main plot, one of the robots has received another transmission, and Ketusago picks up the call. It seems to be another scientist, who claims to have captured one of the alien creatures. They ask Ketusago to come meet them, as researching the specimen might finally help humans find a way to fight back. We end up coming along because, as Ketusago puts it, it'd be pretty depressing to just stick around here, and I guess we do have a pretty good reason to try and help defeat the aliens after what they've done. Before we leave though, Ketusago wants to hide away her robots in a nearby cave. You know, just to keep them safe. And it definitely won't get brought up again in a future game. She then directs us towards the lake for some reason, where an incredibly tragic cutscene plays out. Somehow, this summons Umebuta-kun, you know, that weird lizard from the first game, who Ketusago claims is her creation, an ultimate life form. To get to her colleague's lab, we'll need to ride in Umebuta-kun's mouth across the ocean to find him, stopping at Port Town so we don't die from his bad breath. Except, Umebuta-kun immediately leaves us behind because he's stupid. The game literally just leaves you here without any explanation what to do, but don't worry. If we go down, we can find that the poor robot that got kicked into the water is okay, which is pretty reassuring because we've learned that this thing has Ketusago's younger personality, which would kind of be like her killing her younger self if it died. Anyways, this robot tells us that we can continue through the tunnels to get to Port Town, which you would probably have stumbled into anyways, but it's nice to know that the robot is doing okay. Before we head off, I'm just going to bring up something which is going to feel kind of random, but I promise it has a little bit of importance and is probably one of the last chances I'll have to bring it up. In Towelket 2, you can now move diagonally, which is helpful for getting around. However, RPG Maker 2000 Collision isn't too good at handling diagonal movement, and it's very easy to accidentally clip out of bounds simply by walking into certain walls diagonally. The start of the game was pretty good at making sure that the player couldn't do this, but by now, a lot of players will have a good chance of walking diagonally out of bounds by complete accident. There's a few maps, especially important ones later on, where the atmosphere can get kind of ruined by the player just walking off the map by accident. Now, this is definitely an issue in the context of Towelket 2, but I do want you to keep this in mind, because this bug actually gets addressed in a really amazing way in the next game, and this is pretty much my last chance to talk about it. Just keep it in mind. Bugs aside, we work our way through the caves on foot, since Umebuta-kun ditched us earlier. It's full of hostile mushrooms and bats, and it's a fair journey. At the end, we find a hostile robot boss, who I guess is probably Ketusago's fault for existing, but it sounds like she doesn't even know why she made this one. We have to take it out in a boss battle, and it's probably the second hardest boss fight in the game. It's much stronger than other enemies, but it still isn't what I'd call difficult. Just make sure to use Mochi and Kao-chan's buff skills and heal when needed. Right after the boss fight, there's a sewer area, but there really isn't anything interesting here, aside from the visual gag of a bunch of robots being stuck in the water. Once we escape the sewers, the music gets notably more cheery as we're brought to a town full of cows. The fish hat wearing ones are hostile, but that's pretty par for the course at this point. Why are they wearing fish hats? Do they have anything to do with the fish hats from Towelket 3? No. One thing in town that's definitely worth checking out is this item store. Not for the store itself, it's a pretty standard item store, but for the hidden item on this shelf, known as the Deadly Earrings. Now this item is incredible and funny at the same time. Upon looking at it, you'll immediately notice something is wrong, as it jacks up all of your stats by a ludicrous amount. However, the description reads, "You'll die if you wear this." It seems pretty clear that this item is too good to be true. Just as the item says, if you wear it, you'll die and not be able to use the stats, right? But actually no, it's totally fine to use, and it indeed does let you abuse the huge stat increase. Wearing these will make you virtually invincible and let you one-shot pretty much everything in the game, making combat in this game a joke. If you combine it with a ghostly cow shuriken, that equipment I mentioned you can get from the mine early in the game, you can wipe out every encounter in one turn from here. So what's the deal? Is it like a dev tool item? Is it just some weird joke with multiple layers of irony? Well no, it's simpler than that. By opening up the game in RPG Maker, we can see what actually happened. Kanao thought that adding this death property to the earrings was actually supposed to apply death to the player, rather than a resistance. So yes, these earrings were actually meant to kill you, and Kanao just messed up. Now, this is pretty funny and all, but these earrings are actually kind of a boon to the player. It's basically a cheat item, and if you're getting tired of the combat in this game by this point or later, you can just equip these earrings and start one-shotting all the encounters, which makes everything go by a lot faster. This is pretty much cheating, as I said, but I would genuinely understand if you'd rather just not have combat in this game at this point, since it's going to get even more tedious and annoying very soon. So if you just want to get on with the story, then feel free to use these. I won't use them for this playthrough, so don't worry, I'm getting the intended experience. Speaking of story, at the right side of town, we catch a glimpse of something. It's Paripariume, she's alive! But she's being escorted by a bunch of cows somewhere, and the way is blocked by an alien. Now, I'm pretty sure we could just kick that alien's ass, but apparently the game says it's too dangerous, so we'll need to sneak past him instead. Let's just chalk it up to our party wanting to stay low and not attract any hostile attention. Nearby, there's a cow who works as a dressmaker, so maybe they'll be able to give us disguises. She tells us that the area Paripariume was being brought to is called the Establishment, a place where only aliens and women are allowed to enter, wearing the uniforms she makes. Wait, women specifically? She says that she can make us the dresses, but she has a horrible fever and can't work right now. As compensation, though, she gives us a mysterious activation device, or 99 of them just to be safe, before falling asleep. We then head down south, where we find a strange town full of shrunken cows and tiny doors that the game tells us were too big to go into. There's also some suspicious cardboard boxes that a cow claims is full of strange creatures in it. It's pretty clear what we're going to be doing soon, just from the context of this all. In this town, the aliens are still performing scientific experiments, using the cows as test subjects for a shrinking device of some kind. Inside of the town's laboratory, we can find Kasetsu aliens as enemies. I don't know if they were placed for some sort of lore implication, but for now they just exist to get in our way. The lab is run by an alien known to the cows as Professor Monster, and the cows act as if he's some tough boss fight. But really he's a joke, so feel free to just wipe the floor with him. He's an optional fight, but he appears in the mind, so that's something. Next to Professor Monster, you can find the shrinking machine, and by using the activation device given to us by the dressmaker, we, well, shrink. From here on, we can go into the cardboard boxes, and we find ourselves in a very familiar place. It's the Pond Town straight from Towelket 3. Here's where the game makes it very clear that it's supposed to be a sequel to Towelket 3. As many of the pawns talk about working with humans in the past, and apparently the pawn groom is now at the ripe old age of 60, meaning it's been 23 years since the events of Towelket 3 happened. Now, here's the thing. Even though this is clearly a setup that this game is technically a sequel, the pawns just sort of vaguely reference it. Knowing about what happened in Towelket 3 won't help your understanding of the plot in Towelket 2 in any way. It really just feels more like a big cameo appearance where if you've gone through Towelket 3, you'll go, oh yeah, these guys. But it doesn't really affect the story in any way, you'll just avoid getting confused. The pawns are hanging on to this magic book that can allow the user to grow or shrink at will, which was an important item in Towelket 3. Considering that we've shrunken ourselves down and can't really revert that, we'll need this later. We're offered to use the secret pawn tunnel network to get back to the cow town, but it's full of some pawn thugs, starting another dungeon. This dungeon is very straightforward, just consisting of some very wide paths with some hostile pawn thugs scattered about. Near the end, there's a pawn in the way who calls you an asshole and offers to step aside and let you pass. If you say yes, then he actually does that and lets you pass. However, if you say no, then this lets you fight the hardest boss fight in the game, which honestly isn't saying too much, but this guy is basically an optional super boss compared to everything else in this game. This guy spams AoE attacks and has a huge health pool, so prepare for a pretty long fight if you decide to fight him. He's still not anywhere near challenging, especially if you've been buffing yourself with the Flower Garden in mind, but he's like the one thing in this game that puts up anything resembling a real fight. You might get so bored burning through his huge health pool, you might have a character die by accident. After passing by the pawn, we appear back in Cowtown, and before visiting the dressmaker cow, we can go into an anthill directly nearby. This place is pretty pointless and just serves as another Towelket 3 cameo more than anything, although inspecting the Ant Queen is still kinda funny. You can get the supposed legendary Ant Blade weapon here, but because it has bad accuracy, it kind of sucks. We finally return to the dressmaker cow, and apparently the plan is to climb into her mouth and cure her disease from the inside, because that's just how things work. Now we're in some sort of strange cow meat level, which acts as another dungeon. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I do sort of find this place a little funny aesthetically, with the giant cows everywhere at the cow cells or whatever they are, and there's also goofy looking enemies. But at this point, I really just want to go back to the plot. I mean, the game teased us with a glimpse of Paripariume again after so long, and now we've been getting thrown into back-to-back dungeons that don't really have anything to do with the story. It's all just a bunch of screens dedicated to telling you that this is a sequel to Towelket 3. This is definitely where my complaints regarding the combat start to pick up, because I don't feel like these dungeons have much of a reason to exist other than to pad out game time and superficially connect it to Towelket 3. Now, to be fair, this section is only like 40 minutes long, but it feels like way longer. I want to know what's happening to Paripariume, or learn about the aliens, or anything regarding the main plot. Instead, I'm punching cow germs for some reason. This is a good argument to why a story-based RPG Maker game like Towelket 2 could forego combat entirely, as this section would probably be much shorter if not entirely absent if the combat was taken away. I do understand that the game shouldn't just be one big dramatic plot point after the other, but it would really help if we had a better excuse for doing all of this than that one stupid alien blocking us. At least put like 10 of them there so they're more threatening, or have something like a gate only aliens can open. Then I could at least pretend that this whole song and dance was justified. Rant aside, we get to the end of the cow's dungeon, beat up the evil virus making the cow sick, and hop out of her. Great, she's cured. Now we're offered to go back to Pond Town where we're given the magic book for clearing out the pond tunnel, even though it was totally possible to go through the tunnel without actually fighting anything, including the boss. This finally lets us grow big again and talk to the cow dressmaker so we can finally go on with the story. You can take out your anger on the pond that brought you here if you want. Okay, maybe I feel a little bad. The dressmaker makes uniforms for Ketusago and Mitsue, allowing them to sneak into the establishment. Mochi is left behind as he's a boy and wouldn't be allowed inside, but Ketusago lends him a transceiver so they can communicate. The screen then changes to Paripariume's perspective, where she's standing in front of this mysterious establishment. Stepping inside, it's complicated. This establishment, as it's called, is easily one of the most confusing things about Towelket 2 narratively, and I'm still not sure what to think about it to this day. To put it simply, this building is a location where the aliens force human women to do unsavory work, similar to what Paripariume was forced to do before. However, there's two large differences. First off, the aliens aren't forcing the woman to have sex with them. It's just very perverted and degenerate work in nature. Some of it is sorta understandable, like asking the woman for kisses or massages, but a lot of it is just plain weird or disgusting, like ear cleaning, stepping on them, or even asking them to eat cockroaches. It's clearly perverted and uncomfortable in nature, but the game seems to make it clear that no actual intercourse is going on. The second difference is that the aliens are extremely evil within this building to a cartoonish degree. The women are forced to work 21 hours a day, and are only given 3 hours to sleep in the crowded bunker rooms. If the women can't work, they're either strung up on the walls or outright killed, and deaths from overworking are just a commonly accepted inevitability. I know that the aliens weren't exactly treasuring human life to begin with, but this really brings into question what the aliens' motives are. At this point, I think I'm finally forced to talk about the antagonists of this game. So here's something about Towelket 2's antagonist which I think is pretty interesting. Have you noticed something that I've been doing this whole time when referring to the antagonists in this video? I've just been referring to these things as the aliens. That's because the game never actually tells you what these things are called. They're just named ? And that's it. So the best thing we can call them is just the aliens. Even by the end of the game, you never learn what these things call themselves. This is a pretty interesting angle to take for a story about an alien invasion from sentient aliens capable of communication. Typically in stories about aliens, if the aliens aren't capable of speech, a human character will name them something and then it'll stick, like xenomorphs. If the aliens are capable of communicating, then they often introduce themselves in some way, or at the very least, we get some sort of explanation to why they're attacking, even if it's just through narrative text. However, the aliens in Towelket 2 are clearly fully capable of human speech, but they never name themselves. Despite seeing them talk this entire game, we've never once heard their names or reasons for being here. This has left the motives of the aliens in Towelket 2 a complete mystery up to this point. There were a lot of typical guesses you can make as to why they were invading. Maybe they wanted to occupy Earth for its natural resources. Maybe that head-bursting scene hinted that the aliens are parasites that need hosts to reproduce. Or maybe they just want to be the dominant species in space. These are all serious, logical reasons for why aliens would invade Earth. Now, they're taking pleasure in forcing women to dress in swimsuits. And this is the closest thing this game gives you to being a motive for these aliens. So, is that it? Are the aliens just a bunch of perverts that did all this just to torture women for kicks? Well, no, I don't think so. I think there's a few reasons behind this maddening place for existing, the first being directly tied to this game's deeper story or lore, told through a few completely optional rooms and dialogue boxes. In one of the rooms of the establishment, one of the aliens states that he caved in and implanted Type A thoughts into his brain. This sentence seems to imply two things. First, that the aliens are implanting parts of Cow-chan and possibly humans into themselves, but also that this seems to be an experimental, possibly dangerous thing to do, but they were pressured to doing it for some reason, hence caved in. It almost sounds like drug use. In another room, one of the aliens talks about turning one of the girls into a C-type. Now, we know that A-types are cows and B-types are humans, but we have no idea what a C-type is, other than it being presumably part human. The last example I want to bring up is much larger, but pretty easy to miss. If for some completely unprompted reason, you go the opposite way of the establishment and walk down the seemingly pointless long path full of enemies, you'll find yourself at the city again. Most of the buildings are gone, with just a few strange vans and tents replacing them, but the news station is still standing. If you go inside, you'll find that it's completely occupied by the aliens, who are for some strange reason working just like the humans used to. They work as receptionists, are making news reports, doing performances, and even talking about stocks. Like what? These guys have a stock market? For some reason, the aliens are becoming more and more human-like. From their first introduction, they seem to be cold-blooded and calculating, carrying out unethical scientific experiments on Mochi and his clones with a clear goal of improving their science. Now, they care about things like singing, dancing, sexual pleasures, and worst of all, finances. What I get from all of this is that the aliens have been experimenting with merging DNA and have begun implanting themselves with human and cow DNA. This brings me to my first theory, which is that the goal for invading Earth was to assimilate their own DNA with Earth lifeforms, as a way to improve their own species. This concept isn't unheard of in some alien media, especially stories involving aliens taking over human bodies. However, in a twist, the aliens in Towelket 2 have also grown human desires, causing them to intentionally or unintentionally become freaky enough to build this establishment. They don't actually have the human or cow reproductive organs, but they have desires now, and this building exists to appease them. Another possible reason for this establishment existing might be a narrative one rather than one directly tied to the lore of the game, which is the irony of the situation Paripariume is in. It's very clear that the aliens are the antagonists of the game, but for all the evil they have caused, they accidentally did one good deed. They allowed Paripariume to escape her captors, and likely stopped the human trafficking ring who kidnapped her entirely. This means that the aliens, for all of the terrible things they've done, are at least wiping out the worst of humanity, right? At least, that was the case until this building was introduced. The establishment exists to show that the aliens didn't rescue anyone. They were just put under new management. Even after being saved, Paripariume has just been forced into an even worse situation by her supposed liberators. The last reason for this building existing, and I know this sounds like a cop-out, is just that maybe Kanao just found it funny. Yeah, that's it. I mean, this is the person who made Towelket 3 after all, where half of the humor was about being subjected to weird fetishes. Honestly, I'm really playing up this location like it means something, But most of the people who play this game will likely just see this place as another thing that exists to make them uncomfortable. That could have been the intent the whole time, with no deeper meaning behind it. And that's something you just have to accept with Towelket games. Trying to find a deeper meaning can be interesting, but sometimes things are weird just because Kanao is weird. Okay, babbling over. Back to the game. After exploring the establishment a bit as Paripariume, we returned back to Mochi and crew, where Kao-chan, Mitsue, and Ketusago are ready to sneak into the building. With the uniforms on, the girls are let through, and they find Paripariume inside one of the rooms. Ketusago calls Mochi on the transceiver she gave him, and one of the cows sets up a rope to climb into the unguarded backside of the building. Wait, does this mean everyone could have just escaped out the back window this whole time? Let's not worry about it. Once we climb the rope, we get to see Mochi and Paripariume's touching reunion with one another. Of course, it looks cute, but it's not quite a real reunion. Mochi doesn't remember Paripariume after all, so even though she's happy to see him, he can't remember why. Ketusago mentions that they're planning on going to the scientist's laboratory where they might be able to restore Mochi's memories, so Paripariume agrees to follow them. With Paripariume in tow, we can finally progress towards Port Town to find Umebute-kun. I didn't mention it before, but our progress has been blocked at this point by a simple locked door. Apparently, PPU knows how to lockpick it, so it's impossible to progress past here without her. This subway tunnel is completely overrun by bats, snakes, and moles, and it's basically yet another dungeon. At least this time it feels like we're going somewhere at least. It's pretty long too, but thankfully most of the enemies are pretty easy to avoid. After traveling through the subway for so long, our party decides it'd be best if we took a rest at a stop nearby. Here we find that a few survivors are hiding here after escaping from the aliens, either from the city or from the establishment. One of them talks about some place called the processing plant. Sounds pretty scary. We can also talk to some of our party members as Paripariume here, shedding some light on what they're thinking of the situation. Finally finding a chance to talk to Mochi in private, Paripariume invites him to an outside area so the two can finally talk. Oh, finally, we're going to get to see these two get a chance to talk to each other for real. It's been years since they've seen each other, and... Huh? What do you mean, do I want to skip this cutscene? This is like one of the things the game has been building up to for hours. I've been trudging through all of these dungeons for so long because I wanted to see these two finally get together, and now you're asking me if I want to skip this cutscene? None of the other cutscenes have this option, by the way. It's just this one. And to make things even worse, the default option is yes. This sort of looks like some cruel joke, but there might actually be a somewhat sad reason why this is here I'll bring up later. For now, let's not skip the cutscene and watch it. The night passes by with us outside with Paripariume, but while we were outside, something must have happened to everyone else who was indoors. Everyone else is gone, except for the corpse of a cow. We don't even know if it's our cow, because all of them look the same. With just a corpse left behind, there's no doubt something terrible must have happened and the aliens must have taken everyone. Proceeding forwards and expecting the worst, we end up somewhere that seems actually kinda nice. It's a beach town with cows and other mochi clones, with some of them starting their own families. It sounds nice, but it's clear some of the mochis aren't doing so well. It looks like several of them have recently stopped moving, like they were pre-programmed to stop functioning after some time. This does not bode well for us. The only hint we have on where to go is that some of the cows mention this processing plant that many humans were brought to. There's no doubt terrible things must be happening there, and we have to save our friends as soon as possible. But the way forward is pretty unclear. One hint is that we can find a shrunken pawn in one of the houses, who offers us the magic book so we can shrink and grow at will now. It can be a little easy to get lost here, but first what you're supposed to do is shrink down and go into the sewers. Huh, I wonder why the water is such a weird color. From here, you can find your way to Sewer Town, once again another reference to Towelket 3. I don't know if this is supposed to be the same Sewer Town from Towelket 3, but apparently there are just Kasetsu aliens chilling here and everyone's okay with it, so I guess after 23 years everyone became friends. What we're supposed to do from here is go to the bar in town, where we'll find the rat boss, who may or may not be the rat captain from Towelket 3. He's drinking with a bunch of ladies and ignoring us, so we climb on stage to purposely mess with the bug orchestra. This pisses him off into fighting us, where of course we whoop his ass. With that, we get a pass to go into his counseling building, where we can freely listen in on some of the conversations happening around. And a lot of these are actually pretty funny. They're like comedy skits, and definitely worth reading even if you're concerned for your friends. Once you've filled up on comedy, we can talk with the rat boss about saving our friends, as he's capable of bringing us to the processing plant to save them. Once you're ready, accept his offer to bring you there. The processing plant certainly lives up to its name, as the game takes a dramatic shift in tone from the goofy rat counseling building. Piles of mushed up bodies and gore cover the ground, showing that this place exists to grind up and dispose of the mass number of human corpses the alien invasion has produced. A lot of the aliens here don't even seem to really care about us being here, but there's still plenty of guards that exist to get in our way too. Now, you might be wondering why the aliens need a facility to dispose of human corpses when they were clearly more than fine with just killing humans and leaving their corpses to rot everywhere. But that's because we soon find out that this location isn't just for disposing of bodies, but also a testing ground for alien experiments. One of those experiments is tied to the parasites that we saw earlier, where one alien gladly tells us that they've discovered a way to rapidly reproduce through infesting humans, although it kills the human in the process, hence the need to dispose of the leftover bodies afterwards. One thing to note is that this is apparently a new development for them, not something their species was always able to do. They've modified their own biological reproduction just to improve their ability to invade planets. It really shows that the aliens not only care little for humans, but also their own species' identity. Exploring more of these holding cells, we can just barely see Mitsue being held prisoner in one of the experimentation cells. We can't get to her from this side, but we found the first person that we need to save at least. Continuing upstairs, we can find other types of experiments being held. Here, it seems that there's holding cells with Cow-chan and Mochi clones who are being held under some form of breeding program. Supposedly, the goal is to see if they can make more calves to be turned into soldiers, but it doesn't really seem to be working so well. Thankfully, we can find our own kids here who don't seem to be hurt. Near the rooms, we can find a huge tanker which contains the original Mochi, the real first one. His body seems to be rotting away, but preserved within the tank. Unfortunately, as much as you might want to help him, we can't do anything right now. Right below him, we can enter the parasite test rooms from above, this time letting us into the cell. Here we can finally rescue Mitsue. Or not. With that, Mitsue's life comes to an end, and we can't even properly mourn her death in any way. There's nothing we can do but leave her body behind, no doubt to be disposed of by the aliens later with all of the other corpses. It's really sad to see Mitsue killed off so unceremoniously and in such a terrible way. Although the game was certainly threatening that someone would die at this point, it's still shocking that it went through with it. She wasn't a kind person at the start of the game, but it's hard not to feel bad for her after what she's been through and her terrible death. We can only hope that the others haven't been put into a similar situation. Proceeding forward, we find yet more rooms full of dead, processed bodies, but in one of them we find Ketusago wandering around the corpses. I'm not sure if she simply got dumped into this room while alive through some miracle, or perhaps she escaped and hid here, but she's managed to survive thankfully, so now the only one left to save is Cow-chan. At the final floor of the processing plant, we can find the cow section of the experimentation labs, full of disassembled cows and inactive cows. Eventually, in a small room, we can find Cow-chan being experimented on by an alien. It seems that they've been expecting us to come save her. We pummel the alien, and Cow-chan is thankful for the rescue. With that, we've saved everyone, or at least everyone we could, and we can finally leave this dreadful place. With Ketusago back in our party, we can talk to Umebuta-kun about bringing us across the ocean to the laboratory we've been trying to reach all this time. As we leave though, we see that 2 aliens have followed us outside. They talk about how our escape doesn't matter as they've already modified Cow-chan with something called Program 4, which will kill everyone. Not only that, but they state that our own body is degrading and will cease functioning in 6 or so hours from now. It sounds like the aliens are very confident in our impending deaths, making it clear that this section of the game will no doubt be the climax of the story. Are we going to make it out alive, or are the aliens right about our inevitable deaths? Just as we start getting excited about the concept of reaching the climax of this story, the aliens fire a transmitter dart at Umebuta-kun to track our location. This causes Umebuta-kun to accidentally swallow the entire party, and oh my freaking god, it's another pointless dungeon! Like, this has to be on purpose, right? The game is dropping these bombshells that the end is coming soon, we have Paripariume with us, and we're finally getting to the island that we've been trying to reach for hours. And out of nowhere, we're thrown into another dungeon that very clearly doesn't have anything to do with the story. Okay, I'm sorry. In reality, you can run through this dungeon in like 5 minutes, so it's barely even a problem, but it feels like such a tease. It's like Kanao knew we were getting excited about seeing story progress, so we had to slam on the brakes just to tease us a little longer. Maybe it's intentional, but god damn, it feels like I'm being blueballed here. Just run through the dungeon, beat up this stupid random bonefish boss who of course has nothing to do with anything, and just finish this thing up. Once we escape, we finally find ourselves on the island, where Umebuta-kun has unfortunately died. You get some strangely reflective narrative text when you interact with him, talking about how his stupidity is why Mitsue died, but it's also why Paripariume is with us. At least it's nice that the characters finally have a chance to mourn Mitsue's death in some way here. We're greeted by the professor of the island, who wants to talk with Ketusago about the alien sample. It seems like something might be a little wrong with it. He tells everyone else that we should rest for the time being. We decide to stay on the beach for a bit for now. Standing on the beach, Mochi looks out into the water before his arm falls off and his face starts to decay. Cow-chan meets him there, who understands that Mochi's time is limited, just like all the other Mochi clones we saw by this point. She helps put us back together, but it's only a temporary measure. Inside of the laboratory, it seems that something has gone wrong regarding the alien sample. We don't know what, but it's been locked away, and the doctor refuses to let Ketusago see it. We're then given control of Paripariume to explore the laboratory at night. We can talk to our party, but they don't want to share much information with her. Going to Mochi, Paripariume asks if Mochi could come to her room tonight. Right as she steps outside of his room, the doctor of the island meets her. He tells Paripariume that there's something he'd like to discuss regarding Mochi's memories, and asks her to follow him into the laboratory. She follows him into the elevator and goes downstairs with him, and I'm sure it's intentional that the situation and feeling that she shouldn't follow him is familiar. Paripariume finds herself in a dark room before the doctor turns on the lights, revealing what went wrong with his alien sample. After capturing it, it managed to parasitize his daughter. Desperate to keep his daughter alive, he's attached her to a life support machine. He's convinced that the only way to keep her alive is to feed her human meat. His invitation from the very beginning was just a ploy to feed everyone to his daughter, and he plans on starting with Paripariume. We're brought back to Mochi's perspective, and of course, if we try to go to Paripariume's room, he finds that it's empty for some reason. A cutscene shows that the aliens have tracked us to our island and plan on killing everyone by bombarding the laboratory with cows. As the lab is attacked, Ketusago tries to find the doctor, but he isn't anywhere to be found. Cow-chan comes in, warning Ketusago of the alien attack. The two of them make a plan to gather everyone and hide underground, but just as Cow-chan goes to tell everyone, we're brought back to playing as Mochi again, with mad cows plaguing the entire building. Not even our calves have been spared as we find their corpses in the room next door. Running over to Ketusago, we can find her clutching a key, which we'll need to progress. Cow-chan is still here, and, well, she's not herself anymore. It's up to you on whether you want to do it or not, but you can fight her to put her out of her misery, leaving her corpse behind. We use the key to take the elevator to go downstairs, and Mochi's body starts breaking down again. We're only left with silence as he traverses each of these lab rooms as he breaks down, getting slower and slower each time his body decays further. By the time we reach the bottom floor, Mochi can hardly move, and we hurry over to where we know Paripariume is. At the very least, we can find the remains of the doctor, just so you know everyone else is dead for good measure. Inside of the dark room, we fight the doctor's infected daughter, putting her out of her misery as well. After defeating her, we finally turn on the lights and see that Paripariume is bleeding out in front of us. She calls our name out in pain as the building shakes from bombardment. We're brought to the mind as the scene fades out, though this time we can't leave. Things seem peaceful and relaxing here as always, and we're given another chance to rest within our mind, purchase anything we might be missing, and revisit any rooms to go over the memories that we made over the course of our adventure. However, there's one difference. There seems to be a new door, one that stands out compared to the sterile, white doors lining the walls. One for the final chapter. Once you're done with everything here, you can step inside. Once we step through the door, we find ourselves back in our old home bedroom with Paripariume standing next to us. She asks us to get out of bed, as breakfast is ready downstairs. It's like we just woke up from a bad dream, like the sleepover just ended. Going outside, we find ourselves in what could only be described as a hellish nightmare, with grotesque imagery of Paripariume. Penetrated corpses of her are scattered about, along with hostile enemies named after her. This landscape is terrifying, confusing, and huge. We're dropped in this unpleasant space with no instructions or guidance, and chances are, if you're playing this blind, you'll be left stumbling around here for a while. This space is easily the largest map in the game, far larger than anywhere else, and it's easy to get lost. This would be one of the best times to use Elizabeth, but you can't even ask her for help. This confusion only adds to the terror of being in this place, and it really stands out visually compared to everywhere else in the game. What you need to do is find this grotesque form, similar to the other Paripariume we saw earlier, and by interacting with it, we get an item called blood. We can take this back to the one in the house, which allows us to progress. We're given a brief cutscene, showing what seems to be a memory from long ago, showing Paripariume meeting Mochi for the first time at school. Next, we find ourselves in another nightmare area, this time with tragic music playing instead of the disturbing sounds of the last. This area is filled with dozens of Paripariumes, recounting the abuse she suffered. She cries about the sexual and physical abuse she went through, her hatred over her body being defiled, and the resentment she has over Kao-chan, and her fears of being rejected by Mochi. Despite this all being behind a door in our own mind, these are not the memories of Mochi, but instead the memories of Paripariume. While the memories we collected in our mind are nostalgic or mark accomplishments, the ones that Paripariume have collected are only traumas. This is where the details on Paripariume's history are made clear to us. Although we know about Paripariume being assaulted and kidnapped, we never really experienced what she went through. All we knew was that there was a time skip and Paripariume had suddenly become a different person. We knew that in the back of our mind that her life during those years were terrible, but only now are we hit with the full weight of what she experienced. She had to suffer not only being physically exploited, but knowing that she lost the boy she loved because of a cow, and that boy would find her disgusting if he learned that she had been violated and soiled. After traveling through this area, we get another brief intermission, showing Mochi and Paripariume spending time with each other in the past. The next area seems to be much more melancholic, resembling a series of street benches at night. We can talk to Paripariume sitting on one, but she claims that we're not the person she's looking for. It seems that these memories are more recent, as she laments how she wants to meet Mochi once again, yet he doesn't remember her at all, unable to reciprocate her feelings. At the end of the path, we find another Paripariume sitting in a pool of blood, looking for something. Once again, this part gives you no guidance. What you need to do is go back to one of these wandering shadows and defeat it, giving you an unknown item, which is needed to progress. This time, the flashback is a much more recent one, showing Paripariume finding Mochi out in the rain after he failed to find Kao-chan, and bringing him back home, just as we had seen it. In this last area, we find ourselves climbing down a long staircase, before finally meeting Paripariume looking into a pool of water. We're given one more flashback, more vivid than the others. We're then thrown into a battle against a shadow of Paripariume, too dark to see. No matter what, you can't hurt her, and she can't hurt you. After many turns pass, the game progresses to the final scenes of the game. After finally remembering Paripariume and realizing that he loved her, the game ends. The two of them dead together at the bottom of the laboratory, with Mochi holding on to Paripariume as the two of them die. That's how the story about a girl, a boy, and a cow ends. It took me a long time to accept this ending. The first time I played this game, I was under the impression that I had done something wrong. Like, surely I had accidentally caused a bad end by messing up somewhere. But no, this is the only ending of the game. All of the characters we knew died tragic deaths. We couldn't save the world. We couldn't stop the aliens. We don't even learn about what happened to the planet afterwards. It's a dark, depressing ending. There's no doubt about that. If you look at the story of the game as a struggle to survive against the aliens, then the game no doubt ends in failure. It's easy to look at the game this way, as the game constantly goads you on about needing to stop the aliens. Even from the very first large time skip, you're encouraged to escape from what seems like a hopeless situation to try and get back at the aliens. However, I believe it's not entirely tragic, as at the very least, Mochi and Paripariume were reunited by the end of the game, and I think this is where the writing of Towelket 2 really shines. This game is about memories, the ability to recall the events that make you a person, and to understand what you have before it's too late. The passage of time is harsh, and although memories can be painful, we need them to know who we are. Elements like the mind and the flower garden are direct examples of this. We're given a collection of our memories, a series of past events, and shown in a very literal example how these change us and make us stronger. These are what make our Mochi as we play the game ours. Our memories can be different than others, they're unique. The Mochi we played for most of the game was not the original, he was just a clone, a copy out of hundreds of countless Mochis out there. We even switched the clone we were controlling multiple times. But the thing that made us play like we were still the original Mochi the whole time is that we have memories of what happened to him in the past. We still remember Paripariume and have a desire to save her. We remembered what the aliens did to us and wanted to stop them. However, when Mochi lost his memories after crashing into the forest, that wasn't just amnesia for the sake of being a convenient plot point. That was when the clone we were controlling stopped being Mochi. That's when he became a different person. This is why the Paripariumes we saw at the end of the game said we weren't him. Without the memories of her, this Mochi was no longer the Mochi she knew. A lack of memories could be considered a good thing. When Ketusago inspected us in the laboratory, she made a comment about how losing our memories could be beneficial, and in a way, she was right. Mochi didn't have to remember the horrible trauma of being a test subject for the aliens' research. He didn't have memories of his old hometown, and therefore couldn't be sad about how time had rotted away his childhood home or his mother's death. But at the same time, he couldn't even be sympathetic towards Paripariume for what happened to her, because he didn't know who she was. We as the player are capable of feeling this grief with our memories, but not him. To drive this point further, the Mochi that we play as never ages. The whole world around us ages and changes for the worse, but not Mochi. Lacking memories is the equivalent to never aging. It's only at the end of the game that Mochi is forced to see the memories of Paripariume and learn of the trauma she went through. By doing so, he remembers what happened in the past and understands what happened to her. This is why, even though the Mochi that dies with Paripariume is a clone, his memories are what make him the real Mochi that Paripariume remembers and loves. It's remembering both the happy and painful memories that we are ourselves. This theme isn't only conveyed within the story, but it's also tied to how the game presents itself. When the game starts, it comes off as a goofy, comedic game, but by the time we've reached the ending, we know that the game has a grim, serious plot. If you wanted to put it as simply as possible, Towelket 2 is one of those games that looks cute, but contains shocking and disturbing content. Now, you wouldn't be wrong for describing it like this, but this is incredibly reductive and really doesn't paint the whole picture. The tone of the game, and its shift from being a cutesy, cheerful game to a depressing, disturbing nightmare is directly related to the passage of time and its effects on the characters. Now, not everyone might feel the same, but many people associate the past when they were younger to be a happier, cheerful time, and life becomes more depressing as reality settles in and people grow up. The turning point of this game is quite literally when the childhood friends are made into adults against their will, and by the end of their depressing lives, the one thing tying them together are remembering the times when things were better. This game's plot wouldn't have been able to work if the player didn't experience this tonal shift. These aspects of growing up, memories, and what makes you a person are all told to us through the lens of Mochi, who is interesting as a silent protagonist. On one hand, you're often expected to self-insert to some degree with silent protagonists, and this mostly works very well considering how this game emits its atmosphere. Mochi never tells us how he's feeling, but at pretty much every point of the game, you can probably safely say that whatever you're feeling is exactly what Mochi is feeling. We don't need him to chime in to explain how we should feel, because the game does a great job carrying our emotions already. At the same time, however, Mochi can't just be a straight self-insert, because a large part of his character is that he doesn't remember things that we clearly do. He can't fully grasp how depressing it is that his hometown is falling apart, and he visibly flinches back when Paripariume tries to embrace him at the train station, when the player has wanted them to reunite for so long. In fact, he wasn't even the one who wanted to save Paripariume at the establishment, it was Cow-chan. We know that he would want to do those things, but he doesn't. We know how Mochi should react and what he should want, but the moment he lost his memories, he stopped being Mochi. At this point, we started controlling another character, and we're not self-inserting as the Mochi we're playing as, but instead the Mochi from the start of the game, controlling a character who doesn't understand how the real Mochi would feel. In contrast to Mochi, a character who seems to lose his memories and avoid growing up, Paripariume is the opposite of that. She's a character who is directly transformed by the passing of time and the world around her, and the way the game presents her is one of the subtly best written parts of the game. From the start of the game, you can tell that there's a lot of focus on Paripariume's character and her relationship with Mochi. She takes the lead in a lot of situations, like walking Mochi to school and back home, which is often something that the boy is supposed to do in these sorts of relationships. She heads off into the woods in the rain to find Mochi when he's lost, is the one who takes the lead with the lost cow posters, and she's even brave enough to head off into the city on her own to try and find him. She has what you would call an assertive and tomboyish personality. That's why when we see Paripariume after the time skip, that everything about her seems so wrong and uncomfortable. Right after the time skip, we see her singing in front of an audience, talking like a polite, feminine girl. The once headstrong, tomboyish girl is forced into a subservient, feminine role as time passes. It didn't really sink into me at first, but a big reason why the trauma regarding her memories hits so hard is because of the time skip obscuring what happened to her. You know awful things must have happened over those years, and that's why she's so different, but you don't know exactly what until later, which leaves you with an uncomfortable feeling. Then when you finally learn, you realize why her transformation is justified. Just like Mochi, she's a character who goes through a traumatic experience as time passes. But unlike him, she retains her memories and is changed by them. The red-haired Paripariume and the blonde Paripariume are essentially two different characters, hence her name changing. Neither Mochi nor Paripariume herself want the blonde Paripariume to exist, as she represents a person who has been changed against her will over time, and that's why in the ending scenes of the game, in the mind, we see Paripariume back in her red-haired form. It's as if finally being remembered and embraced by Mochi allowed her to return back to when she was a child, unsullied by what happened to her. Although you control Mochi for a majority of Towelket 2, Paripariume is the real narrative protagonist of the game. The story of the game is centered around her character, and Mochi is simply a point of view for us to observe and help her. While the original Mochi is essentially dead the moment he was captured by the aliens, Paripariume is a character whose entire journey we can observe. She is the only one of the original cast who survives to the end of the game, is transformed and affected by all of the changes the world brings to her, and has a goal in reuniting with Mochi. From the very beginning of the game, it's clear that she loves Mochi, and her journey ends with Mochi finally realizing that he loves her back. This is why I don't think the ending of the game is entirely bleak, even with all of the context around it. Maybe you could call it a form of coping, but I believe the ending is bittersweet, not a completely depressing ending without merit. The last of the main trio of characters I need to talk about is Cow-chan, who is a more complex character on the surface than they originally appear as. You know how I was talking about the idea of how this game appears cute at first, but actually contains disturbing elements? Well, a lot of that is sold by the idea of Cow-chan. She essentially exists to mislead the player at first. It's really easy from the start of the game to look at Cow-chan and think of her as a comedic character. I mean, she's just a cow, right? But in reality, she is much more human than she appears. The game knows this and plays around to it as much as it can. From the very beginning of the game, we can tell that Cow-chan is different from the other cows. She is much more intelligent than the other cows on Mochi's farm, and she even reacts and blushes when Mochi's mother talks about her. Her entire love triangle conflict with Paripariume is foreshadowed from the start of the game when she gets upset that the two are leaving without her, and Paripariume acts annoyed at her. These two already have a history of jealousy with one another, but because Cow-chan is a cow, it's extremely easy to just brush it off as something silly or comedic the first time you play the game. What really drives the idea that Cow-chan is more than just an animal is when Mochi and Cow-chan are forced into the alien breeding experiment. The aliens clearly state that Cow-chan already desired to breed with Mochi beforehand. It's a blink and miss it moment, but the game is literally stating that Cow-chan was romantically and sexually attracted to him even when she was an animal. The idea that she had the emotional intelligence to avoid acting on this until forced to by the aliens is a sign that she's less of an animal than expected. Not only that, Cow-chan clones break if a Mochi clone isn't present, showing that she has a dependency on him as well. After the time skip, Cow-chan is suddenly able to speak and seems to be highly intelligent. She takes on a motherly role, taking care of Mochi and her children. Now, it's clear that this improved intelligence is no doubt from the aliens meddling, but her feelings for Mochi at this time are real, and she is taking care of him like she always has. At the start of the game, Mochi doesn't realize how Paripariume feels about him, too concerned about Cow-chan to the point that he ignores her. In fact, his concern for Cow-chan is so great that he doesn't even care for himself. He got lost in the woods during the rain to try and find her, and even got abducted himself because of how obsessed he was with Cow-chan. He didn't realize what he had until it was gone, and only barely did he realize what he had before it was too late. Cow-chan is basically something like a frivolous childhood obsession that pulled Mochi away from his real love. That's not to say that she's a bad person by any means. She genuinely loves him too, but the two aren't supposed to be together. You could see this as her being a much older woman than him because she seems to be mentally much older than he is, or it could literally just be because they're two different species. Whatever the case is, her purpose in this story is to act as a woman that Mochi regretfully got together with instead of his true love, as well as distracting the player by pretending to be a goofy cow when she's really no different than a human. Before I get into my final thoughts on Towelket 2, there's one more aspect of this game that I would like to cover, and that's the meta aspects of the game. There was actually quite a bit of controversy regarding Towelket 2, and probably not in the ways you would expect. I do first want to state a disclaimer. Everything here is based on snippets of information that I was able to find archived from over 15 years ago. I don't have the full picture, as a lot of information was deleted or lost to time. Because of this, I can't fully promise that everything I say is true. I'm telling you less of a factual story and more of an impression that I was able to get by collecting scattered evidence. This is just my best attempt at trying to understand the lost context of how this game was received when it released. When Kanao made Towelket 2, this is when a lot more people in Japan started noticing the game. The game got a lot of attention due to its darker themes, strong characters, and dramatic storyline, and this brought a lot of new fans into the series. Towelket 2 has a lot of fan art, maybe the most of any game in the series. However, with this attention came with a lot of negative impressions, including from Kanao themselves. Kanao has stated multiple times that they were never fully satisfied with Towelket 2, often citing that they believe that Towelket 3 Karaage is the better game. Supposedly, Kanao wasn't very happy with how Paripariume was presented in this game, showing some dissatisfaction towards the cheerful start of the game, and also the scene where Mochi and PPU talk at the train station. Now, personally, I thought these were pulled off well, but this explains why the latter scene had that awful skip option. Kanao genuinely believed the scene might not have been good enough to watch and that players would want to skip it. It's strange that Kanao would be dissatisfied with Towelket 2, but still decided to release the game in this state. Kanao's confidence, or lack of it regarding certain games but releasing them anyways, is definitely a topic that will get brought up again in later videos. For now, we can be happy that Kanao decided to release Towelket 2, even if it didn't meet their expectations. Many fans clearly enjoyed the game, myself included, and wouldn't have been able to experience it if Kanao didn't release the game. However, this wave of appreciation for a game that Kanao believed was inferior would cause Kanao to build some resentment towards the game, which I promise will become relevant later. Another controversial aspect of Towelket 2's history was that many people began labeling the game as a utsuge, also known as a depression game. This term is usually used in a very reductive tone, to imply that a game is simply just trying to make the player depressed or sad with no real substance. Basically, the idea is that some people claim Towelket 2 was just a game with no real story or writing, and it was just miserable for the sake of trying to make you upset. Many players saw or heard that the ending was everyone dies, and assumed that was all there was to it. This is a big reason why I wanted to go over the story and explain why the ending isn't just sad for sadness' sake. There's real substance there, but you have to look deeper than the surface to understand it. Lastly, and possibly the most ridiculous controversial aspect of Towelket 2, was that many people were calling it a Yume Nikki clone, or even a ripoff. Now, probably everyone and their mom knows about what Yume Nikki is at this point, but if you don't, all you really need to know is that it's an RPG Maker game based around exploring dream world environments. It's well known to be one of the most popular RPG Maker games, and if there's a video that introduces the concept of RPG Maker games to you, there's like a 90% chance the first 5 seconds are going to include Yume Nikki. Now that you've watched this video, you should know that this comparison is really stupid. I mean, Yume Nikki is a game that has zero dialogue, while Towelket 2 is a game entirely based around pages of written dialogue and story. Yume Nikki has zero combat, while Towelket 2 has too much if anything. Yume Nikki takes place in dream worlds, while Towelket 2 primarily takes place in cities, towns, and buildings. The two designs of these games are completely different, and yet people constantly compared the two, often claiming that Towelket 2 was a knockoff of Yume Nikki. Why is that? Well, it's because of this one area. This one disturbing Paripariume area at the end of the game. I mean, it's kind of like an abstract nightmare space. It's easy to get lost in, and it's even got a creepy graphic floating in the background, just like a map in Yume Nikki. Now, you should know that this is just one map in Towelket 2, and it's stupid to think the entire game is Yume Nikki just because of one map. But this is by far the most visually interesting map of the game. Chances are, if you go and Google images of Towelket 2 right now, one of the first things you'll see is probably going to be a screenshot of this map. Yeah, it's basically spoilers to one of the most creative parts of the game, but who cares about that when you can get clicks in people's interest, right? I could only imagine I'd get like 10 times the views on this video if I had a thumbnail of this with "this game broke me" next to it or something like that. Because this area is the most shocking and interesting, a lot of people would share pictures of this area, and that piqued a lot of people's interest in the game. However, some just assume that the entirety of Towelket 2 was like this, because this was their first impression, and because Yume Nikki is also an RPG Maker game, it must be a ripoff. Hell, if you play around in the game, you'll find that the Paripariume map doesn't even loop around, which is a pretty major aspect to the majority of Yume Nikki maps, so even this comparison is flawed. I should also add that another reason this comparison came up so often was because Towelket 2 was released pretty much right after Yume Nikki. Now, if you Google Yume Nikki's release date, you might get a year like 2004, but in reality that's for the earliest version of the game, which was very obscure and incomplete. The final update to Yume Nikki was done in October 2007, which is when the game really started picking up in popularity and introduced a lot of people to RPG Maker. Towelket 2 released about half a year later, and with Yume Nikki still fresh in people's minds, as well as being a lot of people's only experience with RPG Maker, many people jumped to the conclusion that Towelket 2 must have been based on or was outright ripping off Yume Nikki. Because of these bizarre and nonsensical comparisons, Kanao understandably got pretty upset, with some distaste being aimed at Yume Nikki itself. Let's just say that the relationship between Kanao and Yume Nikki is a negative one. And it's a big reason why starting a video about Towelket by bringing up Yume Nikki is probably one of the biggest faux pas you can make. Thankfully, now the constant comparisons to Yume Nikki are over, now that people in Japan have a lot more experience with RPG Maker games in general. I sure am glad that's over with, and now if Towelket gets any interest in the West, it won't have such stupid comparisons, or people claiming that it's based off of some unrelated game. Oh, sorry, yeah, pardon me, I completely forgot about the time Paula was forced to work in a brothel and prostitute herself for 5 years. Or how about that time the cow from Happy Happy Village forced herself on Ness, and then they had 3 half-cow, half-human cyborg babies? Or how about the time Ness's mom was held at gunpoint and had to give a navel massage to Gygus with her feet while wearing a bikini and eating cockroaches before getting thrown into a meat grinder and being drained into the soup? Okay, I'm sorry. Clearly, I'm just beating a dead cow here, because anyone who's ever been a fan of any RPG with a contemporary setting ever has gotten claims that their game is really just an Earthbound fan game. Just to make things clear, Kanao has directly made a statement after Towelket 2's release saying that they've never played Earthbound, and I definitely don't think this game takes any inspiration from it. I think this strange bit of misinformation is pretty funny, as it's a very Western mindset. You know how in Japan, the game was compared to Yume Nikki because of the timing of the game's release? Well, I think these comparisons to Earthbound are caused because of the timing of Towelket 2's English translation being released. The thing about Towelket 2 is that despite the game coming out in the year 2008, the first English translation came out over 10 years later, in 2019. This was pretty much the peak time of the fad, where it was considered cool to say that your game was Earthbound inspired. Therefore, Western players who found the game at this point mistakenly believed that this RPG game too must be Earthbound inspired, since that was just a popular thing at the time. They didn't realize that Towelket 2 was much older than this trend. I think a lot of people also didn't really realize that Earthbound itself was pretty niche even in Japan too. It sold a lot better than it did in the West for sure, but your chances of finding someone who played Mother 2 in Japan before 2010 was still pretty low, much less someone who made a game based on it. Now, I do want to clarify that I don't hold any malice towards people who claim Towelket 2 is inspired by Earthbound, as I always see it said in a positive way. I think it's just a result of the translation coming out at an inopportune time, but just for the record, no, Towelket 2 is not Earthbound inspired. After understanding Kanao's issues with Yume Nikki, I understand that these statements can dismiss the creativity of the author's work. So, you might be wondering what Towelket 2 is inspired by then, and thankfully that gets brought up in this same post. Kanao clearly states that their first inspiration for the Towelket series is Magical Vacation, a Japanese-only RPG released for the Game Boy Advance. They also talk about how much they were motivated by Final Fantasy IX as well. Magical Vacation is an RPG game where players control a student who is invited to go to a magic school, where the students are able to control elemental spirits. However, during a school trip, the students are attacked and kidnapped by evil entities from another dimension, scattering them across different worlds and starting the plot of the game. There's some simple similarities, like how both Magical Vacation and the Towelket series love using food or drink-based names for their characters. Both games also involve journeys through space and aliens from other worlds. Although, admittedly, Magical Vacation is a bit more like a cross-dimensional thing, but it's close enough. However, as I looked more into the game, the deeper connections started to make more sense. Magical Vacation's writing and story includes a lot of discussion about life and death, perspectives on different lifespans and forms of life, and even the concept of reincarnation and the afterlife. This sort of topic is very common in the Towelket games, and also gives Magical Vacation a similar vibe where a cute game has some darker and more serious elements to it, just like Towelket. After this, it became a lot clearer why Magical Vacation was an inspiration to Towelket. I'd go into more detail, but then I'd probably spoil future Towelket games. That said, it's funny to bring up this comparison in a Towelket 2 video, as Towelket 2 might be one of the games with the fewest connections with Magical Vacation, at least in my opinion. Towelket 3 and 1 have a lot more in common with it, and if you really want to get into it, there's a game way later in the Towelket series that wears the magical vacation inspiration on its sleeve. Yorumoru Kumiri, Shippotachi no Kizuna, or often just called Yoru 2, feels like Kanao made it a personal challenge to make a game that made the inspiration as blatant as possible, as if trying to get people to finally understand where the original inspirations came from. I'm definitely getting ahead of myself here though, so let's talk about something that does have a closer connection with Towelket 2. I can pretty confidently state that the Final Fantasy IX inspiration makes a lot of sense for Towelket 2. At first, it might be easy to scoff at this idea. I mean, Earthbound is a contemporary RPG, while Final Fantasy is a high fantasy setting. On the surface, it looks like Towelket 2 has nothing to do with Final Fantasy. But if you've played both games, then it starts making a lot more sense. If you don't mind me spoiling a 25-year-old game, the major plot twist of Final Fantasy IX is that the main character, Zidane, is actually an artificial life form. He was created by an alien species from another planet, whose species is dying out. To combat this, they plan on assimilating themselves with Gaia, basically Earth, to replace the native population. Also, it's just a cool game. Now, obviously there's a ton of differences between these two games. There's no cow sex or establishments going on in Final Fantasy IX either, and I should also clarify that this blog post I keep referencing never mentions Towelket 2 by name. It was made 2 years after Towelket 2's release, so it could be about another Towelket game, but it's pretty clear that Kanao is a fan of the Final Fantasy games as they're referenced in-game directly a lot. So it makes more sense to say that those games are an inspiration over Mother 2, which they stated they've never played. So some viewers might be reading through this blog post and be wondering about something. I've been talking about Westerners recently comparing Towelket 2 to Earthbound, but if Kanao is clarifying that they haven't played Mother 2 from 15 years ago, then wouldn't those be in response to Japanese comparisons? And to that I'll say, we'll unfortunately have to mention that in a later video. With that said, let's finally go to my final thoughts I have about the game and wrap things up. Towelket 2 is a very underappreciated gem of a game that is a great example of how Kanao progressed as a game developer and writer. The story and characters really make this game memorable, and it will certainly make an impression on anyone who plays through it. The game certainly has some flaws. For example, some stretches of gameplay which feel like annoying padding, and some annoyingly frequent yet shallow combat, but these can be overlooked once you finish the game. Compared to Towelket 3, this game clearly has a stronger story focus, and will likely make a stronger impact on anyone who plays it. A lot of Towelket fans argue that you should just skip Towelket 3 and just play 2, and I can see why. However, I do think the jump from Towelket 3 to Towelket 2 is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, so I would personally suggest playing both of them if you have the time for both games, and you don't mind if Towelket 3 is a goofier game with a less engaging story. If you're just looking for a better story or first impression though, then Towelket 2 is certainly my recommendation. With all that said, I would easily rank this game as an A-tier game, and would easily say that Towelket 2 is one of the best RPG Maker games out there, and you should definitely play it if you consider yourself an RPG Maker fan. If you have an afternoon or two to put into this game, then please try it out. Even if you aren't a fan of RPG Maker games, then I would recommend it if you've got the attention span to read through about 4 to 6 hours of text, and take in the finer details. I know that's a lot to ask for some people, and probably a big reason why this game didn't get as popular as some other RPG Maker games, but I promise it's worth it. And now, I have something I want to add in post. While I was in the middle of editing this video, Kanao announced that they would be creating a remake of Towelket 2, so now I have to mention it. It's been a 17-year gap between the original Towelket 2 and this new remake, and it really shows in the graphical style. Unfortunately at this moment, I can't share too much about it. Supposedly there are plans to change some of the parts of the game that I mentioned felt like padding, such as the pawn area. This remake could possibly be an opportunity to improve on the issues I had with Towelket 2 and make it into an even better game. That said, the remake's not out yet, so I can't give you an educated opinion on it, just some hypothetical predictions. The timing is a little unfortunate, as I would like to continue on to my Towelket One video rather than waiting for this remake to release. Don't worry though, if the game is different enough to warrant another video, then I could certainly make it in the future, just like the Towelket 3 MV remake. I'll likely post a quick comment under this video regarding my first thoughts once it releases regardless. Just note that the game will almost certainly be Japanese only, and it may not receive a translation for a long time. So, if you're interested in playing Towelket 2, I'd still highly suggest playing the original version. So what's next? Well, Towelket 1 of course, which is obviously the third game in the series. Now, I'm just gonna go ahead and say that Towelket 1 is the definitive Towelket game for the majority of fans. That is, if you had to pick one game to represent the entire series, I think most fans would probably pick this one. Towelket 1 is a game that takes the memorable and crazy adventure from Towelket 3, but also the strong story and characters from 2 and mixes them together to create a truly unique game that nothing has ever come close to replicating, even after 15 years. Oh yeah, and the game is good by the way, spoilers. After you've had your fill of Towelket 2, I can't recommend playing Towelket 1 enough. I'll be working on a video about Towelket 1, but expect it to take a good long time. There's a ton to talk about regarding the game, the history around it, and the insane roller coaster that is the Towelket series in there. If there's any game I'd suggest you play rather than waiting for me to make a video on, it's that one. So go download it and play it. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully it was better than my last video on Towelket 3, but if you have any recommendations or suggestions on how I can improve these videos, I'm all ears. Also, if you've played Towelket 2, either before or after this video, I would love to hear about your experience and thoughts on the game, as hearing about other people's theories and takes on the themes of Towelket games is endlessly intriguing. For now, I'll be starting work on the Towelket 1 video, so please look forward to it in the future. Thank you.